The sun hung low in the western sky, casting long golden shadows across the dusty town. The small frontier settlement looked quiet, almost sleepy, but the wind carried a hint of urgency that seemed to touch everything it passed. A lone rider appeared on the horizon, her horse kicking up small clouds of dust with each step. She sat tall in the saddle, a determined figure wrapped in a worn coat and a wide-brimmed hat that shaded her face. The dust clung to her boots and skirt, marking the miles she had traveled. Every movement carried a sense of purpose, as if she had been running from something, or perhaps toward something she could not yet name. As she rode through the main street, the few townspeople who lingered outside their wooden shops gave her a cautious glance. Their curiosity was mingled with respect. There was something in the way she carried herself that suggested she had endured much. The women behind shop counters whispered quietly, while the men tipped their hats or turned away. She didn't notice them. Her eyes were scanning, searching for something or someone. Her hand rested lightly on the reins, but it also hovered near the satchel at her side, as if ready to defend herself if the need arose. She finally slowed near a small general store, the boards creaking under her horse's hooves. She pulled the reins taut, guiding the animal to a stop in front of the entrance. The bell above the door jingled softly as she dismounted, shaking the dust from her coat. The wind carried a fine layer of dust from the street, clinging to her hair and eyelashes, and she swiped at it impatiently. "Hurry up," she whispered under her breath, frustrated at the slow pace of time, at the world that seemed to move so sluggishly compared to the urgency she felt inside. As she entered the store, her eyes flicked over the shelves stacked with tins, sacks of flour, and jars of preserves. She moved with the careful precision of someone who had learned to survive by noticing every detail, every shadow, every small sound. She paused for a moment by a shelf of dried herbs, running her fingers along the labels. The air smelled faintly of wood smoke and old paper, comforting in its familiarity. But it did nothing to calm the restless energy inside her. She needed more than herbs or food. She needed a plan, a way forward, a place where the past couldn't follow her. Outside, someone was watching. He had been leaning against the post of a building, one foot resting on the dusty street, hands folded loosely over the brim of his hat. A tall man, rugged and suntanned, with the kind of steady presence that could either comfort or intimidate, depending on the moment. His eyes followed her every movement, not in a way that felt threatening, but in a way that carried quiet interest. He had seen many travelers pass through, many people in need, many faces carrying pain, but there was something different about her. Something that spoke to him, though he didn't yet know why. When she stepped back out of the store, her purchases clutched tightly in her hands. The man moved slightly as if to approach, but he waited, measuring the distance between them. The woman adjusted her hat and set her jaw, clearly aware of his presence. Their eyes met for the first time in a fleeting, charged moment. She blinked, momentarily startled, then quickly looked away, busying herself with securing her things on the horse. He, however, stayed put, letting the silence stretch for a heartbeat too long before speaking. "Rough day?" His voice was low, steady, carrying a tone that could be gentle or firm depending on the listener's choice. She paused, glancing up at him, her instincts immediately alert. She had learned long ago to be cautious of strangers, especially men who appeared suddenly in quiet towns. But there was something in his gaze that suggested he had nothing but goodwill, and yet she couldn't allow herself to trust easily. "I've had better," she said finally, her voice calm but edged with the kind of guardedness that only comes from years of living with disappointment. She didn't elaborate. She never did at first, not with strangers, not with anyone. Her life had taught her that words could be dangerous, that trust was a risk she couldn't afford. He nodded slowly, tipping his hat in acknowledgement. "Looks like you've been on the road a while," he observed. His eyes flicked to the dust on her boots, the streaks on her coat, the way she carried herself with cautious precision. "The wind doesn't lie. Neither do the tracks behind your horse." Her lips pressed together, a faint smile threatening but not breaking free. "The road tells the truth," she replied softly, almost to herself. "But sometimes the truth isn't what you want to hear." There was a pause. The man's gaze softened. "Maybe," he said carefully, "but sometimes the road also shows us what we need to see." He extended a hand in greeting, not overly confident, not demanding, just offering. The gesture was simple, but in that moment it carried the weight of honesty. She hesitated, weighing the decision in a silent battle between instinct and curiosity. Then almost reluctantly she shook his hand. The touch was brief, professional, yet something unspoken passed between them. Something neither fully understood. A connection. Not immediate, not loud, but quiet and significant. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of sagebrush and dry earth brushing against her face. She shook her head slightly as if to clear it of distractions and climbed back onto her horse. The cowboy stepped back, giving her space, though his eyes never left her. She urged the horse forward, moving down the street, dust rising in lazy clouds around her. She could feel his gaze following, steady, patient, curious, yet respectful. As they moved apart, the woman whispered again, almost to herself this time, "Hurry up," and it was unclear whether she meant herself, the horse, or the future she was chasing. The words seemed to hang in the air, swallowed by the dusty streets of the small town. He heard them anyway, and his heart gave a quiet, unexpected pang. There was a depth to her that he hadn't anticipated, a story that went beyond the simple exterior of a traveler passing through. She paused at the edge of town, glancing back once, catching a fleeting glimpse of him watching. Her lips twitched, almost forming a smile, and for a moment she allowed herself a thought she quickly pushed away, that maybe she wasn't entirely alone in this vast, challenging world. That maybe, just maybe, someone could see her. Not just the exterior. Not just the dust and the weariness, but the person she truly was beneath it all. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and the town seemed to exhale, settling back into its quiet rhythm. The woman guided her horse toward the horizon, the dust rising behind her like a curtain between her past and what lay ahead. And somewhere in the distance the cowboy remained, standing in the warmth of the fading day, thinking that some encounters were meant to linger, even when the road carried you apart. Their story had begun. Not with words, not with declarations, not with grand gestures, but with a moment of recognition, a glance, a whispered frustration, and the silent understanding that sometimes, even in the dust of a small town, something significant could begin. The morning sun spilled over the horizon in soft golden light, spilling warmth across the quiet town. The streets were empty except for the occasional clatter of hooves or the distant bark of a dog. The woman, still weary from her journey, walked slowly through the town, her satchel slung over her shoulder and her eyes scanning every detail. The events of the previous evening had left her restless. She couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, though it wasn't a frightening watchfulness, rather something calm, steady, and careful. She thought of the cowboy, the man with kind eyes who had somehow noticed her without judgment. There was something about him that unsettled her curiosity in the best way. She found herself at the edge of the general store again, though this time for practical reasons rather than necessity. She needed supplies, flour, dried beans, and a few jars of preserves to keep herself fed during the next leg of her journey. The store was quiet, almost empty, and the bell jingled faintly as she entered. She moved with a practiced ease, selecting the items she needed, counting coins carefully and adjusting her hat when a small gust of wind blew in through the door. The shopkeeper nodded politely but didn't engage her in conversation. Most people in the town kept to themselves, and she had long since learned not to pry into the lives of strangers. Outside, the cowboy leaned against a wooden post, arms crossed loosely over his chest, watching her with a quiet attentiveness. He didn't approach immediately. He had learned over time that patience was more powerful than words. Some people revealed themselves slowly, like the layers of dust and sunburn that marked a long journey. He could sense that she carried more than just the weariness of travel. There were invisible burdens she bore, and they didn't reveal themselves easily. Eventually, he stepped forward, his boots crunching softly on the dirt street. She glanced up, her eyes narrowing slightly, not out of suspicion but in cautious acknowledgement. "Good morning," he said, his voice low and even, carrying the ease of someone comfortable with silence and observation alike. "Morning," she replied, keeping her tone neutral. There was a flicker of surprise in her eyes, as though she had not expected him to appear again so quickly. She adjusted the straps of her satchel, subtly signaling that she was prepared for any conversation, any question, any attempt at intrusion. "Need help carrying that?" he asked, gesturing to the small pile of supplies she had gathered. His manner was polite, without insistence, but there was a quiet offer of assistance that was hard to ignore. She hesitated for a moment. She had learned over time that accepting help could mean vulnerability, and vulnerability had often brought disappointment, yet something in the way he stood there, relaxed and patient, made her lower her guard slightly. That would be helpful, she said cautiously. She allowed him to lift the supplies, his strong hands handling them with careful precision. As they walked together down the dusty street, she kept her eyes forward, but she could feel his presence beside her. There was an unspoken understanding in the air, a shared rhythm in the steps of the horse-drawn carts and the sway of the wooden boards beneath their feet. The cowboy didn't try to fill the silence with meaningless chatter. Instead, he allowed the quiet to stretch, letting her settle into it, letting her feel that she was seen without being pressured. Finally, after a stretch of road where the dust swirled lazily around their feet, he spoke again. "You've been traveling long," he said gently. "I can tell from the wear on your boots, the set of your shoulders, and the look in your eyes. You've been carrying more than just a satchel and supplies." Her hand tightened slightly on the strap of her satchel. She wasn't used to strangers noticing such details, and it made her uneasy, though not entirely unpleasant. "Everyone carries something," she said softly, almost to herself. "Some things you can see, some things you can't." He nodded slowly, not pressing further but allowing the statement to hang in the air. There was wisdom in his restraint, and for a moment she felt an unfamiliar sense of comfort. She glanced at him out of the corner of her eye, noticing how the morning light caught the edges of his face, how the faint lines around his eyes suggested experience and quiet endurance. The walk continued in companionable silence until they reached the edge of town, where a small creek trickled through the dusty landscape. She paused, setting down her satchel, and knelt to wash her hands in the cool, clear water. He did not intrude but remained nearby watching, his presence steady and unobtrusive. "You should eat something," he said finally, gesturing to the supplies she had carried. "Even travelers need to take care of themselves. The road can be harsh if you ignore it." She looked up at him, a faint, almost reluctant smile forming. "You make it sound easy," she replied. "Taking care of yourself. Some days it feels like the world doesn't leave room for it." He shrugged lightly. "It's not always easy, but it's worth it. You matter more than just surviving the day." His words were simple, but there was a sincerity that reached her, something she hadn't expected to hear in months, or maybe years. It was not just a kindness. It was recognition, acknowledgement of her value. They shared a modest meal together by the creek, simple bread and dried meat, but it was enough. She found herself talking quietly, revealing small details of her journey, the places she had passed, the hardships she had endured. He listened without interruption, his presence a comforting anchor rather than a prying force. She had not realized how much she had missed being heard, being seen without judgment. In turn, he shared small pieces of his own story, of long days spent working the land, of the quiet loneliness that came from years of watching the world pass by without much connection. He spoke not of grandeur, not of heroics, but of the simple struggles and small joys that shaped his life. She listened with interest, surprised at how naturally she felt drawn into his world, even as she remained cautious. As the sun climbed higher, the wind carried a gentle warmth, rustling the leaves and stirring the dust along the creek bank. The woman leaned back against a rock, feeling a rare sense of calm. She glanced at the cowboy who was quietly tending to their few belongings. For a fleeting moment, she allowed herself to imagine what it might be like to trust someone again, to share not just space, but the burden of her life. The thought was fragile, delicate, like the first light of morning breaking through a cloudy sky, but it was there nonetheless. The rest of the morning passed with small, simple gestures. He helped repair a small tear in her coat, using thread and careful stitches. She taught him to identify some of the herbs she had purchased, sharing a bit of knowledge she had picked up during her travels. They laughed quietly at minor mistakes, at clumsy attempts to balance the horse while carrying supplies, at the stubbornness of an old mule that refused to move. Each small moment built a bridge between them, a foundation of trust and understanding that neither had expected to find so quickly. By midday, the sun had reached its zenith, and the air shimmered with heat. She stood and brushed off her coat, realizing that the rest of her journey was still ahead. Yet she felt a subtle shift inside herself, a small easing of the tension she had carried for so long. The cowboy, noticing the change, offered a quiet smile. "You're doing better than you realize," he said. "Sometimes it takes more than a few days to find someone who sees you for who you are, but when it happens, it makes the journey lighter." She nodded, unsure whether to trust the thought but grateful for the sentiment. "I hope that's true," she replied softly. As they prepared to part ways, she hesitated, the weight of her satchel suddenly feeling heavier, not from its contents, but from the unspoken feelings that had begun to stir inside her. He noticed her hesitation and did not rush her. Instead, he simply said, "I'll be around. The town isn't going anywhere, and neither am I. Sometimes the road brings people together even if they don't realize it right away." Her heart gave a small, quiet beat at the words. She managed a faint smile before mounting her horse once more, guiding it toward the next stretch of dusty trail. Behind her, he watched, standing tall in the warm light of the afternoon, feeling that their meeting was only the beginning. The bond was fragile, untested, but undeniable. As she rode away, the wind caught her hair and the hem of her coat, lifting them like a whisper of freedom. For the first time in a long while, she felt the faintest hope that she wasn't entirely alone, and somewhere behind her in the quiet of the town, the cowboy's eyes lingered on her departing figure, knowing that this encounter had left its mark on both of them. The road ahead was long, and the dust would settle slowly. But something important had already begun. A shared understanding, a quiet connection, a spark that neither time nor distance could easily erase. The sun rose slowly over the horizon, casting a warm orange glow across the rugged landscape. The town was still quiet in the early hours, with only the distant crowing of a rooster and the faint clatter of carts on wooden boards breaking the silence. The woman had returned to the outskirts of town after resting the previous evening. She had decided to continue her journey, though a small, persistent thought lingered in her mind about the cowboy, the man whose quiet presence had unexpectedly touched her heart. She pushed it aside, telling herself that the road was long and trust was a luxury she could not afford. She rode along a narrow path winding through a field of tall, waving grasses. The wind swept through the stalks, brushing against her face and carrying with it the faint scent of wildflowers and dry earth. The sun climbed higher, turning the dust and dirt beneath her horse's hooves into a shimmering haze. The journey had begun peacefully enough, but the quiet soon gave way to an uneasy tension. She sensed movement in the distance, the sudden flicker of shapes among the grass. Her hand instinctively went to the satchel at her side, gripping it tightly. Then she heard the noise, a startled neigh from her horse, the frantic rustle of feet in the grass. A loose wagon, abandoned or uncontrolled, was rolling down the slope toward the path where she rode. She tried to steer her horse out of the way, but the animal panicked, kicking and rearing, its movements jerky and fearful. Her heart pounded in her chest, adrenaline surging as she realized how quickly a calm morning could turn dangerous. Before she could react further, the cowboy appeared, seemingly out of nowhere. He rode in with steady determination, guiding his horse with expert hands and quick reflexes. He reached her side in moments, speaking calmly but firmly. "Hold steady. Lean into the saddle." His voice cut through the chaos like a steady anchor. She followed his instructions instinctively, trusting him even as her instincts screamed to flee. Together, they managed to maneuver the horses out of the path of the runaway wagon. The wagon thundered past them, narrowly missing both animals, and came to a stop against a rock, splintering its wooden sides with a loud crash. The woman's breath came in quick, uneven gasps, and her hand shook as she gripped the reins. The cowboy dismounted swiftly, moving to steady her horse while his own stood calmly, obedient and alert. "You're safe," he said gently, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. His touch was firm but not forceful, grounding her even as her pulse raced. She looked up at him, the tension in her body slowly ebbing away, replaced by an overwhelming sense of gratitude and awe. He had arrived just in time, his presence saving her from what could have been a serious accident. Thank you," she managed to say, her voice still trembling. She didn't trust her emotions fully, but she wanted him to know how much his help had meant. "Don't mention it," he replied, brushing off the moment as if it were nothing. Yet his eyes held a quiet concern, and she realized that he was genuinely attentive to her well-being. "It's easy to misjudge the road sometimes. You have to watch the small details or they'll catch up with you." They stood together for a moment, the dust settling around them, the wagon wreck behind them, and the morning sun shining bright and relentless overhead. She realized, almost reluctantly, that she felt a new level of trust toward this man, a trust born not of words or promises but of shared action and genuine care. He hadn't just watched or advised. He had acted. He had risked himself without hesitation, simply because it was the right thing to do. As they remounted their horses, the woman felt a subtle shift within her. The journey she had been so determined to face alone suddenly felt a little less daunting. She glanced at the cowboy riding beside her, noticing how naturally he handled his horse, the calm control in his every movement, and the quiet strength in his posture. There was a depth to him she hadn't seen before, a kind of reliability and courage that made her heart flutter despite her cautious nature. They rode in companionable silence for a while, following a narrow trail that twisted through hills and patches of scrub. She observed him out of the corner of her eye, noting the way his hands gripped the reins, the slight creases around his eyes from sun and wind, and the ease with which he navigated the uneven terrain. It was clear he had spent countless hours in the saddle, learning the land and its patterns, mastering the art of survival in a world that often demanded toughness and resilience. Finally, she spoke, her voice quiet but steady. "I thought I had to face everything alone," she admitted, almost as if confessing to the wind itself. "I didn't expect this, you." He glanced at her, a faint, knowing smile tugging at his lips. "You're not as alone as you think," he said simply. "Some roads bring people together, even when they don't realize it. Sometimes it takes a little chaos to see who really matters." She considered his words, feeling a warmth spreading in her chest. She had spent so long hiding, protecting herself from disappointment and heartbreak, that the idea of someone genuinely noticing her, seeing her struggle and still offering support, was almost overwhelming. She didn't respond immediately, unsure of how to put these unfamiliar feelings into words. As they approached a small grove near the trail, the air shifted slightly. Birds scattered from the branches overhead, and the distant sound of running water reached their ears. They dismounted to rest the horses and tend to their small injuries from the morning's scare. The cowboy inspected her horse with careful hands, checking for any scrapes or bruises while she tended to herself, brushing off dust and straightening her coat. "You handled yourself well back there," he said, his tone filled with admiration. "Most people would have panicked completely." She shook her head slightly, a faint smile forming on her lips. "I panicked," she admitted. "But you gave me a reason to calm down, a reason to trust that it would be all right." He nodded, understanding more in her few words than she realized. "Trust can be hard," he said, "but it's worth it when you find someone who respects it and who doesn't take advantage of it." The simplicity of his words struck her. For so long she had believed that trust was dangerous, that it was a weakness to rely on others. But here was a man who had shown her that trust could also be a strength, that it could create bonds that made life richer and safer. She found herself looking at him differently, noticing the steady kindness in his eyes, the way his body language spoke of confidence without arrogance, of experience without cruelty. They sat together under the shade of a large oak tree, sharing quiet conversation and simple food from her satchel. They spoke of everyday things, the weather, the landscape, the small oddities of life in the frontier town. But beneath the ordinary topics lay a deeper understanding. Each word, each glance, each small gesture reinforced a connection that neither could yet name. The hours passed and the sun began its slow descent, painting the sky with brilliant oranges and pinks. Shadows stretched long across the ground and the air cooled as the evening approached. She realized with a sudden pang of awareness that she had not once felt the weight of loneliness while in his presence. The tension and caution that had always defined her interactions with strangers had loosened, replaced by something softer, something tentative yet undeniable. As they prepared to continue their journey toward the next town, the cowboy turned to her with a serious expression. "You're stronger than you know," he said. "But strength doesn't mean facing everything alone. Sometimes it means letting someone walk beside you, even when the road is uncertain." She met his gaze, the honesty and steadiness in his eyes touching her in a way that words alone could not convey. She felt a quiet stirring inside her, a sense of hope and possibility that had been dormant for too long. She nodded slowly, acknowledging the truth in his words, and allowing herself, just for a moment, to consider what it might mean to trust someone fully. As they rode side by side into the evening light, the dust rising gently around their horses, The woman realized that this day, marked by danger and unexpected rescue, had shifted something inside her. The road ahead was still long and the challenges of life would not vanish, but she felt a newfound courage, a sense that perhaps she didn't have to face everything alone. The cowboy's presence was no longer just comforting. It was a quiet, steadying force that gave her strength she had thought lost. For the first time in many months, she allowed herself a thought that was both terrifying and exhilarating, that maybe, just maybe, she could let someone in. And somewhere beside her, the cowboy felt the same unspoken connection, the shared understanding that this encounter had become more than chance. It was the beginning of something significant, a bond forged not in words but in action, trust, and the shared experience of facing the unknown together. The evening air was cool and calm, carrying the faint scent of wildflowers and earth. The sky had shifted from the warm tones of sunset to a deep star-studded blue. The woman and the cowboy had set up a small camp near the edge of a quiet grove, where the trees offered shelter from the light wind. The horses grazed a short distance away, tethered to low branches, their soft munching blending with the gentle rustle of leaves. The woman sat on a blanket spread across the ground, her knees pulled close to her chest, staring into the small fire they had built. The flames flickered, casting dancing shadows across her face. And for the first time that day, she allowed herself to feel fully present. The cowboy sat across from her, tending the fire with careful hands. He had spent the day observing her from a distance, noticing the subtle ways she relaxed and tensed, the moments when her smile hinted at feelings she rarely allowed herself to express. He knew that beneath her guarded exterior was a heart that had endured much, and that the events of the day, especially the danger they had faced together, had opened a small door to trust and understanding. "You've been quiet," he said softly, breaking the silence without forcing it. His voice carried warmth, a tone that invited her to speak without fear of judgment. She glanced at him, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "I've been thinking," she said slowly, almost hesitant, as if weighing every word before it left her lips. "About everything. About the road, about why I keep moving, about why I keep expecting people to disappoint me." He nodded, listening intently. "Sometimes we carry more than we should," he said. "Sometimes we don't even realize how heavy it is until someone helps us bear it even a little." She looked away, focusing on the fire, the dancing flames mirroring the chaos of her thoughts. "It's not that I don't want help," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's that I don't know if I can trust it will be safe. I've been hurt before. I've learned that trusting someone can mean giving them power over the parts of you that you don't want anyone to touch." The cowboy's expression softened. "I understand that," he said. "I felt the same way. There are scars no one sees, moments you carry alone because you think it's safer that way, but it doesn't have to stay that way forever, not if you don't want it to." Her gaze lifted to meet his, and for the first time in a long while, she saw no judgment in his eyes, only understanding. There was a quiet honesty there that was rare, and it made her heart ache in a way she couldn't easily name. "You make it sound simple," she said. "Trusting someone, letting them in. It feels impossible sometimes." He reached out, a hand hovering just above hers without touching, giving her space but signaling that he was present. "It's not simple," he said. "It's one of the hardest things we can do, but it's also one of the most rewarding. You're worth more than just surviving each day, more than just moving from place to place. You deserve someone who sees you, who respects you, who values you for everything you are." Her chest tightened at his words. She had spent so long believing that her worth was tied only to what she could do for herself, to the independence she had cultivated like armor. No one had ever spoken to her like this before, not in a way that made her feel seen, truly seen rather than judged or pitied. Her eyes misted slightly and she looked down, brushing at the corner of her eye as if she could hide the small, vulnerable expression of emotion that had slipped past her guard. She began, then stopped, unsure how to continue. Words had always been difficult for her when it came to feelings. She had spent years running from vulnerability, hiding behind strength and self-reliance. But now, in the quiet of the grove, under the soft glow of the firelight, and with the cowboy's steady gaze upon her, she felt the tiniest crack in the wall she had built around her heart. He waited patiently, giving her the space to gather her thoughts, never pushing, never rushing. His calm presence was reassuring, like a steady anchor in a world that had often felt unpredictable and harsh. Finally, she spoke, her voice low but clear. "I'm afraid," she admitted. "Afraid that if I let someone in, they'll leave, or that I'll get hurt again." He nodded slowly, understanding the weight of her fear. "Fear is natural," he said. "It doesn't mean you're weak. It means you care, that you've felt deeply. But sometimes taking a risk is the only way to find something real. And I promise, I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here because I see you. And I believe you're worth more than just a night, more than a passing moment. You're worth everything it takes to stay." Her breath caught at the sincerity in his words. She had never heard anyone speak to her with such unguarded honesty. For a moment, the world felt still, the night air holding its breath as if waiting to witness what would come next. Tears blurred her vision, though she didn't move to wipe them away. They were not tears of sadness but of release, of the recognition that someone had finally acknowledged her worth, not for what she could give, but simply for who she was. She looked at him, her eyes searching his for any sign of insincerity, and found none, only steady, unwavering care. "I don't know if I can do this," she admitted softly, her voice trembling. "I don't know if I can trust someone fully again." "You don't have to decide right now," he said gently. "Trust doesn't happen all at once. It grows little by little, with shared moments, with honesty, with patience. And I'll wait. As long as it takes, I'll wait." She felt a warmth spreading through her chest, a sensation she had not felt in a long time. His words, his patience, his unwavering respect, all of it made her heart feel lighter, even as fear lingered at the edges. For the first time, she realized that trust could be built slowly, that vulnerability did not have to mean danger, that it could instead mean connection, understanding, and even hope. They sat together in silence for a while, listening to the gentle murmur of the creek nearby and the occasional rustle of leaves. Words were not necessary in this moment. Their shared presence carried more meaning than any conversation could. She noticed the way his eyes softened when he looked at her, the slight curve of his lips in quiet thought, the way he seemed to breathe in rhythm with the calm of the night. Finally, she reached out tentatively, her hand brushing against his. He did not flinch or pull away, but placed his hand over hers, a gesture of gentle reassurance. The contact was light but grounding, a silent promise that he would not push, would not betray, would simply be there. I don't know what to say," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You don't have to say anything," he replied. "Sometimes being seen is enough. Sometimes just knowing someone cares is all we need to start feeling safe again." Her heart beat faster at his words, and she realized that for the first time in many years, she felt the possibility of hope, of connection, of a life that was not defined solely by struggle and isolation. She squeezed his hand gently, a small, tentative gesture, and he returned it with equal care. The night deepened, the stars twinkling above them like distant promises. The fire crackled softly, sending sparks upward, and the two of them sat together, hands intertwined, hearts cautiously opening to the idea that perhaps they were not as alone as they had believed. In that quiet, intimate moment, she allowed herself to imagine a future where trust was not a threat but a bridge, where vulnerability was not weakness but strength, and where someone could truly see her and value her for who she was. And somewhere beside her, the cowboy felt the same understanding, the same deep respect and care, realizing that the bond they had begun to form was now stronger, more meaningful, and filled with the promise of something lasting. The night wrapped around them like a gentle embrace, and for the first time in a long while, the woman allowed herself to believe that she was worthy of love, trust, and safety. She didn't yet know what the future held, but in the quiet presence of the man sitting across from her, she felt a peace that had been missing for too long. And in that moment, she realized that some connections were not fleeting or shallow. They were the kind that could change the course of a life, quietly, without fanfare, but with lasting power. The morning dawned crisp and bright, the sunlight spilling over the horizon and casting a soft glow on the town and surrounding hills. The air was fresh with the scent of wildflowers and dew, carrying a sense of renewal that matched the mood between the woman and the cowboy. The events of the past days, the meeting in the dust, the dangers on the trail, the confessions by the fire, had brought them closer than either could have expected. Trust had grown slowly and carefully, and something deeper now connected them, a bond built on shared experiences, courage, and quiet understanding. The woman stirred from her sleep on the blanket near the grove where they had camped, brushing her hair back from her face. Her heart felt lighter than it had in months, maybe years. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't running from the past or worrying about what might happen next. She glanced at the cowboy who was already tending the fire, his movements calm and familiar, as if he had been doing this every morning for decades. The sight of him brought a small, genuine smile to her lips, a rare, unguarded expression that spoke of comfort and safety. He looked up as she stretched and smiled, a warmth in his eyes that mirrored her own feelings. "Morning," he said, his voice steady and gentle. "Sleep well?" "Yes," she replied softly, sitting up and taking a deep breath of the crisp morning air. "Better than I have in a long time." She paused, realizing that part of this peace came from knowing he was nearby, that she was no longer carrying the weight of her journey entirely alone. They spent the morning together in simple, quiet routine. She fed the horses while he prepared a modest breakfast over the fire. They worked side by side, sharing small conversation and light laughter, the ease between them growing naturally with each passing moment. There was no rush, no pressure, only the gentle rhythm of life and the subtle intimacy of companionship. She noticed more than ever how much she appreciated his presence, not just as a protector, but as someone who understood her, respected her, and valued her without expectation or judgment. After breakfast, they prepared to leave the grove and continue toward the next town. The woman had planned to travel alone, but now she felt a different kind of courage. She glanced at the cowboy, whose horse was saddled and ready, and felt an unexpected thrill at the thought of traveling together. The wind ruffled her hair as she mounted, and he slid onto his horse beside her, his movements natural and easy, the unspoken bond between them guiding their actions. As they rode through the early morning light, the cowboy spoke quietly. "You don't have to rush anymore," he said. "Not with me, not if you don't want to. The road can wait. Life doesn't have to be only about moving forward. It can also be about standing still, enjoying the moments that matter." She considered his words, feeling a mixture of relief and warmth. She had spent so long rushing through life, avoiding connections and fearing vulnerability, that the idea of pausing and embracing someone's presence felt foreign, yet welcome. She smiled faintly. "I think I'd like that," she admitted softly. The days that followed were filled with small, meaningful moments that strengthened their bond. They worked together in the town, helping with chores, repairing fences, tending horses, and assisting neighbors with daily tasks. Each task, no matter how simple, became an opportunity to share trust, laughter, and quiet companionship. She began to feel a sense of belonging, a rare feeling for someone who had spent so long on the move and in solitude. Evenings were spent by the fire, where they shared stories of their pasts, their dreams, and their fears. The woman revealed details she had never told anyone before, the heartbreaks, the struggles, the moments of doubt that had haunted her for years. He listened with patience and care, never interrupting, never judging, always offering understanding and quiet reassurance. In turn, he spoke of his own life, his struggles with loneliness, the long hours spent working the land, and the quiet yearning he had felt for meaningful connection. Their shared stories wove a tapestry of mutual respect and empathy, each thread strengthening the bond that had begun on the dusty street weeks before. One evening, as the sun dipped below the hills and the sky turned shades of pink and purple, they rode to a small clearing overlooking the valley below. The wind was gentle, carrying the scents of earth and grass, and the quiet rustle of leaves seemed to echo the rhythm of their hearts. They dismounted and stood side by side, watching the fading light. "You know," the cowboy said softly, breaking the comfortable silence, "I never thought I'd meet someone who could make the world feel different, better. But you've done that for me. You've reminded me that life isn't just about surviving, it's about living." The woman turned to him, her eyes reflecting the colors of the sunset. "You've reminded me too," she admitted, "that it's possible to trust, to care, to feel something without fear that it will be taken away. You've changed something inside me." He reached for her hand, holding it gently in his own. "We've changed each other," he said, "and that's worth everything." A smile spread across her face, genuine and unguarded. She felt a sense of peace and contentment she had never known. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe that the past no longer had to define her. that she could embrace the present and the future with someone who truly cared for her. Days turned into weeks, and their connection deepened with each shared experience. They rode together across the valleys, worked the land, and helped neighbors in the small town, becoming known as a pair who complemented each other in every way. The woman's confidence grew, not just in herself but in the bond they shared. The cowboy's steady presence provided a foundation of safety and care, while her courage and independence inspired him in return. One afternoon, as they tended to the horses near the creek, the woman paused, looking out over the sparkling water. She realized how much her life had changed in such a short time. She had once thought that trust and love were luxuries she could not afford, that the road was her only companion. But now, with the cowboy by her side, she felt a sense of belonging and partnership she had never imagined. He noticed her pause and joined her, standing close, their shoulders nearly touching. "You're thinking," he said, smiling gently. She laughed softly. "I am, about how unexpected everything has been, about how life can surprise you, even when you think you've seen it all." He nodded, his eyes reflecting the same sense of wonder and contentment. Life does that sometimes, and it's better when you have someone to share it with. The woman turned to him, her eyes shining with gratitude and trust. "I'm glad it's you," she said simply. "I'm glad it's you who's here." He smiled, lifting his hat slightly in a playful gesture, though the warmth in his eyes was sincere. "I'm glad too, more than I can say." As the sun set behind the hills, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and red, they stood together in quiet companionship. The wind carried the scent of the earth and the distant sound of the town settling for the night. The woman felt her heart swell with a sense of hope and possibility, knowing that the bond they shared was real, steady, and worth holding on to. In the weeks that followed, their partnership grew stronger, grounded not in grand declarations or fleeting gestures, but in daily acts of care, shared responsibilities, laughter, and the quiet moments that made life meaningful. They became inseparable, two individuals who had found each other against the odds, discovering that true connection was built through patience, understanding, and genuine respect. One evening, as they rode side by side through the dusty trail leading out of town, she glanced at him, feeling a sense of gratitude she could hardly put into words. "I never thought I'd find this," she said softly. "Neither did I," he replied. "But sometimes the road brings exactly what you need, even when you don't expect it." They rode in companionable silence, the wind in their hair, the horses moving steadily beneath them, and the horizon stretching endlessly before them. For the first time in a long time, she felt truly at peace. She had found someone who valued her, cared for her, and walked beside her willingly, through dust and danger, through uncertainty and fear. And she knew without a doubt that this was the beginning of something lasting, a partnership rooted in trust, respect, and genuine love. As the trail wound through the hills and valleys, the woman and the cowboy rode together into the fading light, their shadows stretching long behind them. The dust settled gently on the ground, and the world seemed quiet and still, as if acknowledging the bond that had formed. They had faced uncertainty, danger, and fear, yet they had emerged stronger together, with hearts open and trust renewed. And in that quiet, golden moment, they both understood that some connections were not fleeting or fragile. They were steady, enduring, and capable of carrying two souls forward into whatever the road and life might bring. Together, they were no longer just travelers in the dust. They were partners, companions, and something more, something worth holding on to through every sunrise, every challenge, and every quiet, shared moment in the dust of the frontier.